Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about how to reduce costs in your contact center without compromising experience. I'm Sean McIver. I'm a product owner at Max Contact. My role within the company is to essentially stand in the customer's shoes as we develop features for our contact center solution suite, and essentially make sure that the way in which we develop those features is going to be of the most value to our clients. I'm pleased to be able to say that I'm joined today as well by Ben Booth, who is our CEO of Max Contact. Ben, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I'm Ben Booth, CEO of Max Contact. Been working in the contact center space 20 years. Started off as an engineer and an implementations engineer, so I've been involved with or installed over 500 contact centers. So I've had first-hand view of these challenges and then also the evolution of technology in this sector.
Yep, I'm gonna call out something as well. We were talking before the webinar started. So I started off in a contact center while I was still at university, and so although in the blurb for the webinar it says that we have nearly 30 years experience between us, we worked out that it's actually nearly 40, which is always a delightful thought to suddenly realize. So yeah, I've been involved in contact centers in various industries across energy, debt collection, and BPOs before joining Max Contact as product owner. So yeah, between us we have almost 4 decades, Ben. That's a delight.
Yes.
So a bit of administration to start with. We are recording the session. The recording of the session will be sent out afterwards. We will also be having a Q&A section at the end. There is a Q&A. If you hover over the Zoom window, there's a Q&A section at the bottom. Please do submit your questions throughout the course of this conversation, and we will get through as many as we can at the end. If we don't get through all of the Q&A sections, then we will kind of contact people individually afterwards to follow up on all of those various answers. With that all being said, yeah, let's make a start. So why are we doing this webinar, I guess, is the first question to ask. And the headlines kind of paint the picture here rather well. You know, it's no surprise to anybody on this call, I imagine, that we've seen, you know, the energy crisis in terms of prices, cost of living crisis has gone up. There was the Great Resignation following the COVID-19. And so looking at business as a landscape, and it kind of, to a greater or lesser extent, it's almost regardless of the industry type, everyone has been affected by this in some way, shape or form. Whether that's your suppliers, whether that's your customers, you know, huge impacts across the board. And those are just some headlines from there. So, you know, I guess let's just talk around this a little bit. You know, mentioned in terms of people costs there, you know, Ben, you know, your thoughts on that one.
Oh, people costs rising. I think every sector in the world's seeing this. I mean, we're a development company. Never more have prices increased than they have, especially in tech and development resources. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, everyone's been asked to do less with more. In the pandemic, we saw across our base, certainly, and it was, you know, we speak to our competitors, it was iterated across them as well, that people and staffing was down around 30%, but actually interactions into contact centers was also up about 30%. So it was, you know, it's coming from both sides. The work from home meant that a lot of people weren't waiting till they finish work to sort those problems out that typically you used to do when you have an admin day. And the influx just happened, and it's not gone away, and it won't go away now. We're in this, and we're all trying to find the best solution for it going forward. Yeah,
I think the other point that's worth making is that for within our industry, within the contact center industry, I think it's more to point out that there are certain demographics within that industry that are perhaps more affected than others. And one that I want to call out from my own experience previously is those who are in the BPO space. You know, you think about they're trying to deliver not only on their own metrics, but you're also trying to deliver on the client requirements, which can be massively varied across all of your individual third-party clients. And, you know, in some cases that could be well over 100 different clients or more. And so I think that's very challenging, because then also you've got that layering effect. Your provider licensing costs may be going up, your third-party squeeze, if you like, may be increasing, and their differentiating requirements then puts pressure on the systems, puts pressure on the training, puts pressure on, a whole range of metrics that then follow on from that, which I think is worth pointing out. As well as the increase in the business costs overall that we've talked around. And obviously businesses want to, they need to turn around a profit, they need to, be adequately functional as a business. And I think that's one that's worth pointing out, because particularly for BPOs, when you've got those third parties and those requirements are different, the degree of flexibility that's required to deliver what those clients want is critical. And I guess to a point, we see some of that internally as well, Ben.
Yeah, and don't forget, we see DCAs as BPOs. They're just debt collection BPOs, and new regulations are on the way. And it's not just customer service. Regulations is a key part that you have to adhere to, which is getting trickier and more costly to do. So there's lots of different aspects, but the issue is it's all going one way, and that is the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with that in mind, these are the drivers behind the conversations that we're looking to have today. And so I think as we think about how do we go about reducing the costs without compromising on the customer and the employee experience, I think that's a really important point here. We're not just talking about the customer experience, we're talking about the employee experience. And when we were doing some research on this, and when we were kind of digesting it and thinking about it, we felt it generally fell into one of three pillars. You had people, you had technology, and then you had data. And so we're going to tackle those in not isolation, because they branch across each other, but we'll cover those off individually. And there are it's a web that kind of covers off and touches multiple points. The very first thing, I guess, is the biggest one, certainly from everything that I've read, is around people. It was the first thing that we said when we talked about this as a subject. We're going to need to talk about people and staffing. And that's on two fronts. Obviously, you've got recruitment and retention. So I guess, Ben, in terms of through the lens of reducing costs without compromising on that employee experience or the customer experience, what can you do with your people?
How do you do it? Look, I won't preempt this. There is no silver bullet. There is no right or wrong, and none of the answers we give today apply to every contact center, or don't, and some do. And we see such a range. We see contact centers that utilize and do all the things we may discuss today, all the way through. I mentioned earlier, I spoke to a DCA the other day that was still using spreadsheets and manual dial. So we're going to do a broad range here, and hopefully you'll get something from it. So what we did see a lot on the people costs in the contact center space is, I will say originally, I'd go back pre-pandemic, a lot of agents were treated a bit as a commodity in the contact center space. Attrition, we used to see upwards of 30% in some sectors. That wasn't uncommon. As we had the staffing crisis, there was a massive shift towards employee engagement in the contact center, but that came in a hybrid working. What motivates people, if you're an agent and you don't understand how you add value to the business, or what the goals of the company are, or have I got a progression path, all those things other than just money, all of a sudden came to light and surfaced. And I think a lot of companies are now focusing on these things. If you're not, think about them the same as you do in most businesses. And it also became a massive struggle where we're seeing, still 50% of our contact centers are in hybrid or remote working. And working from home in a contact center where you've got your branded mug for company X, if you've not got that buying commitment and there's motivation there, then it's very easy just to chase that branded mug for another contact center, and you're going to work for someone else. So your investment in recruitment and training is lost. And I think companies are starting to realize that now, and that investment in the staff and keeping them and skilling on board them is actually is catching up with the rest of the workplace that you typically see that wasn't there prior for a lot of companies. So attrition rates we're seeing are down, which is great. We're still seeing across the base that there is understaffing So we've got BPOs that they could recruit more, they would put more staff on the campaign if they could. So there's still that, then the under-resource. And then a lot of it came down to the training, where we were seeing attrition rates increase, where the staff that had been there the longest, actually, the burden was coming on them because they were understaffed and the training was being rushed through to get people on the phones to deal with the interactions. But it wasn't actually adding the value of having the bum on the seat that it used to do. So this then ties you back to data, and all these things will start linking together. But with the people side, it really has changed. And I think it's looking at the people when we're looking in, and I don't like cost cutting as a term. We've had this conversation, Sean. It's sustainable growth and what business doesn't have to grow sustainably. And actually setting this challenge to all the people. And I want to discuss this. It becomes a challenge for the business and the teams from the ground up, not the top down. And they need to share that we need to grow sustainably. And a lot of the improvements that can be made in contact centers, and we do it in our business, actually come from the people who do the jobs, because they're the ones who do the jobs, and start engaging with them, how they do it, what could be done better, what's causing their pain in the day, all those things that are good things to get back from on the people side. So there's lots to do there. And we are seeing a big shift in the contact center space as well when we speak to clients and what they're doing, but it certainly is playing catch up, and there's still a lot more to do. So just want to bring that to the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the value placed on staff, exactly as you say, that migration from commodity to asset, and actually seeing them as a whole person, I think that's critically important. And you touched on a point that I want to circle back to as well, which was around the long-standing staff. Now, we've had a conversation internally about, it's funny, and I invite everybody to consider this on the webinar. When you've used any product for a long period of time, whether that's Word, whether that's Excel, whether that's your iPhone, whether that's whatever it might be, you learn the shortcuts that you find the most valuable, whether that's Alt-Tab to change windows, whether that's Control-S to save, or whether that's swipe to turn on your camera instantly. If someone's brand new to using that particular product or device, they don't know that. And so if you think about that through that lens, looking at your existing staff that you have that have been there for a long period of time, they will be a data resource. And this is this dotted line I was talking about across the data, but they're actually a data resource. I remember this when I was with a large utilities company, and I was working through the system, and it was all keyboard driven at the time. Again, showing my age, why not? It was all keyboard driven at the time. And so there was a new start sat next to me, and they were, had this big list of things. And I was like, that that you can actually see all of the shortcuts if you go here, here, and here, and it was things like that. So your staff are a resource that you should be making use of. And that does another thing as well. If you centralize that knowledge, you reduce the risk should someone who is a long-standing member of staff choose to leave. But you also, if they've got efficiencies that they can suggest, you're then making them feel of more value, or you're recognizing that they have a valued contribution, which has a huge advantage to the business overall. It increases your retention rate. So actively engaging with your staff around, right, okay, let's look at our processes. Where are the bottlenecks? What's a challenge? What are some of the shortcuts, and sharing that information out and celebrating that can be an incredibly powerful tool that's zero cost as well.
Yeah, it's valued. They feel valued. That's what it comes down to. Their input is valued, and that does work as well. It's just seen some of the questions. Yeah, and there's some people might be doing this already. It is definitely recognised. I will say, we've said in the people, there's a big focus on demand reduction, which is also the tech. Absolutely, look, it can add value. It can, we sell that type of technology. The big thing is that balance between demand reduction, the cost of dealing with interactions, and customer experience, because who's not been frustrated when you want to speak to someone and you can? And that, for me, ties back to data. Again, we're going to talk more on that. So it's the big thing that we have seen across all the sectors and all the implementations we've carried out, especially in BPO's DCA spaces, is when we look at an initiative where there is absolute value to be had, and that's where software exists at the end of the day, is to deliver value. Anyone who sells these technologies wouldn't have a business otherwise, is that it's not a fire and forget. And that's a big mistake as well that people make when they implement new initiatives, technologies. We'll talk about that a bit more with some of them in the next section. So I'm mindful of time already, Sean. You can talk about this subject for a while.
Well, I mean, seeing as we are, we are a tech company, let's move on to the tech then. Now, we talked before about reduction of demand. Just to kind of frame that one, I remember when I was working for a DCA previously, I was a dialer manager there. And I remember one of the things I hated hearing most, because I was quite close to people on the phones, one of the things I hated hearing most was a user receiving a call and then saying to a customer, oh, you just want to pay. I was just like, that's such a loss of value and expertise when it's just making a payment. Why didn't they use a self-serve route? So anyway, sorry, but yeah, in terms of tech side of things, let's think about, agent productivity.
Yeah, I was as well in the last 10 years. I tell you what, I don't know an industry that has embraced modern technology as much as the contact center space. And any system now probably does more than you think it does. That's another problem. This is why customer success teams have cropped up, and lean on them as well. Lean on your vendors. Ask them to prove how you can deliver more value. Ultimately, that's all our vendors' job. Our job is to deliver value to our clients. And they need to make sure as vendors that they remember that as well. So, and there's lots of little things they can do that are there. And there's extreme technologies that are coming out, extreme because they're cutting edge. So there's things like the real-time agent assistance. We've gone through, we've had Omni's here to stay, but I think still 70% of all interactions are voice. So though everyone's trying to do deflection to digital, because it's cheaper. Yes, it works. Yes, it can save value, but it's not solving the 70% of the issue. So now agent assistance is coming in. And I will call out, I've seen different agent assist products. I do not agree with complete scripted ones. I think they devalue and demotivate agents more so than any other tool in the industry. But they most certainly can improve and add value and increase training time and make people deal with more complex or more activities than rather than just one. So examples are of agent assist, if you don't know what it is it's real-time transcription of a call while I'm talking. So me and Sean would have real-time transcription. And if Sean as a client turned around and said, where's my parcel? The agent assist would either, what's my balance? It would go off with integration with the CRM or whatever and pull that information back to the agent to make it much faster and more efficient. You can link into knowledge base articles. So I've heard you've asked this question. Here's the most common knowledge answer that we know solves this problem. So it can really add value for training. So that's where the technology is going. But then there's simple things that we still don't see. I mean, DCA is an example. PCI payment processing has been here for a long time, but the amount of DCAs we still don't see using technologies like pay by link. Send an SMS. Most products now start producing workflows, contact strategies, where one of them, send an SMS with a link and they can pay by the link. It's collecting a payment and it's using where Omni's coming in, it's great. You still need to try all the channels because what works for one client doesn't work for another. And don't assume I'm going to get all my payments by sending pay by link because you won't. The IVR was very popular. There's common things we've discussed in the past, Sean, we've gone through them that your technology can do. But that then ties back for me, a big part of it is looking at the data and setting some of these challenges of how we improve efficiencies within the contact center, because that ultimately will reduce costs because you can do less with more. And there's lots of things like that we don't see being used in contact centers, that products like ours and others, this isn't just us, they do this by default, or they'll have the capability to do it. And you should be leaning on your vendors. I'd say the biggest thing most people learned in the pandemic is you as a business for a contact center are as agile as your partner. Right, well, we're in an agile workspace now, and most partners that are around should be agile and they should be adapting as well to you. And you should be leaning on them to get some of these answers and what you can do and what's already available, because you can do it and there's no extra cost typically. So, yeah. But technology is really moving on. I will say what works for one doesn't work for another. Conversational AI is great as well. The chatbots have been around for a while. I use chatbots if it makes sense. If I'm making a payment, perfect example, it's a simple process. It makes your business 24/7. You can do it. But we also have within our client base a fraud line for a bank. You don't use a chatbot for fraud. You get the call through to the agent. And we're still seeing issues. I know I'm ranting here. It's one of the biggest challenges we still see is routing the interaction to the person who can deal with it. that is still one of the biggest challenges where it bounces around or they can't deal with it. Technologies, NLP's here, read the email. We can read the email, we can see what the problem is, and you can send it to the skill or send them a knowledge base article first to see if they can solve it themselves. But getting the right interaction to the right person as well. The basic concepts, what's the reason the interactions are high, and looking at the data. There isn't many contact centers, and we're going to talk about data, where a lot of the reports and the data is there, and sometimes it is overwhelming. So some of them have too many, but there isn't many if you focus on the simple questions. That there isn't improvements that can be made from the data that's in front of you. So bit of a rant, but yeah, I see a lot of contact centers.
it's all valid, and I think I'm going to jump on the bandwagon here as well, and just add that you talked about being aware of what the tool set is that you have available to you, and I think that goes across all of our software that we use within the industry. The example I always come back to is the IVR. Are you offering to call a customer back? Are you offering to redirect the customer to web chat that you can send them a link via SMS when it's appropriate to do so? We talked about scripting before, and while I agree with you, Ben, that a flat block of text that you have to read out verbatim, that's not going to work for anyone. It's going to make someone sound like a robot. But if you have a scripting tool that's available to you, you can ensure that you present users with the right information at the right time. So in a previous role many years ago, when I was working for an outbound contact center, we had a script whereby the first page, it was 3 buttons. I think it was answer machine, no answer, and proceed. And that was all they saw at that point. And as they worked through the pages of the script, they were only presented with the relevant information at the relevant time. That made training a lot easier for us, because it meant that they knew that they would have the information they needed to hand throughout the course.
Yep.
So if a new client came in, or if there was a new process that came in, that was a script edit with a note to the staff saying, just a heads up, the script has been updated. And that was all they needed to know. And it meant that there weren't times when we had to take people off the phone, or fewer times when we had to take people off the phone as a result of that. And I think that that's important to recognize that a lot of people or a lot of companies have this tool set. And you mentioned as well, working with the partners and the providers, if you as a company have a challenge, I would actively encourage you to bring that challenge, not the solution, but the challenge to the table with your provider and say, right, here's my challenge. What do you suggest that I do? Have that proactive conversation, because they should be working with you, because as a company, we love the data that we get from those conversations, because if we find that we're having similar conversations, actually that speaks to a bigger thing in the industry we need to handle. Speaking of data, that leads us beautifully into
just one point. Someone's asked the question, and it was a point I wanted to make actually on real-time assist. It is expensive. It's a new technology, but the cost will come down fast. Speech analytics is similar. When that entered the market, it was incredibly expensive. Unless you were doing 50,000 hours a week, they didn't want to talk to you, because they were selling to banks and insurance companies. The technology of that is dropping rapidly as well. The technology of real-time assist, yes, it is expensive. There is a case there for it's not cost viable at the moment, but it will be in the short space of time. And I know companies, including ourselves, we're looking at building, and I know other companies that are as well, and it's going to be significantly cheaper in the future. So it will happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Data, again, one of my favorite subjects.
We have the QA still open and available. If you want to pop your questions in there, we've got a couple from prior to the webinar beginning. We will work through them as we can in the next few minutes. But before we do that, data. Oh, please look at data. One of the sayings, Sean will hate this. In our company, we have a lot of data, and data doesn't lie. It's my biggest thing. Data does not lie. And there isn't a contact center that we've been involved with that I used to do. I used to do customer success at contact centers. So a client would come to us with a challenge. I'd go and look at the data, and I'd point out areas for improvement. And also what's working really well. You need to do that as well. And there isn't a center that I've been into ever whereby by looking at the data, I haven't found ways to improve that contact center with the tools they've already got available to them. We mentioned earlier on the tech, and typically not just our products. When I refer to this, I do a lot of research. Is most products that people buy, they use less than 30% of the features available to them.
And because development's happening so fast, we release every 2 weeks, some people release every day, and features are coming out so fast, it's actually hard to keep up with the features that are available. So doing the challenges, looking at the data, looking for areas of improvement is something when we're talking about growing sustainably, that a challenge at every level of the business should be set on how we can improve as a company, not cut costs, because that challenge is achievable. I guarantee it in every contact center. There will be something you can do. And I know some people will do a very, very good job of it, but as we were setting off our customer success, we went to one of our best contact centers with one of the best management teams, and we set a challenge with them that we'll find something with our customer success. And even if we found one thing, and we did, and it's great, but it's collaborative. We worked on it together. We explained and looked at the data and explained why, and they implemented it. Because it's also sometimes a fresh pair of eyes. Sometimes you look at the same data all the time, and you've got your KPIs, and you're looking at those KPIs, and that drives that behavior, but you're not looking over here. And so data is key. And there's lots of tools, and then unlocking data. And I know it's an expensive tool, but again, it is dropping. Speech analytics. There's an incredible amount of data in the voice for demand reduction, for why people are calling. There's still a lot bigger contact centers you go into, and you go, well, what's the number one reason you call? And they can't answer that question. Or why is it surged this month versus last month? Something's happened, but you don't know because there's just too much to listen to. And typically speech analytics comes in for quality. Yeah, it should be used for quality. But there's also a massive amount being mixed on training, coaching, part of your onboarding process. Another one's underperformance. Still underperformance goes unnoticed, especially in bigger contact centers. And when we're all squeezed on the number of staff we can recruit because of costs, well, one thing no contact center in any business actually can put up with at the moment is underperformance. So then it's coaching up, but also coach out. So the data is critical. And I still see nearly in most contact centers, I will say about 70%, they're not looking at the data to drive those improvements enough.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing that I would say, just kind of thinking about everything that we've talked about so far, before we move on to our QA, is that it's not the big ticket items necessarily that make the biggest difference. It's actually accumulation of very small, very easy wins that generally make a bigger difference, and they're cumulative. And so if we think about, for example, making those small changes to scripting, getting the feedback from the frontline staff, getting all of those in, understanding those bottlenecks, understanding the data, and making small incremental tweaks and changes in a way where you can either A/B test or you can undo it if you feel it's not working, that actually is a more effective way of doing it than, for example, if you bring in some brand new system or make some huge seismic change, because that generally involves a lot of preparation and at least some training, which is expensive outlay. Actually, you can go on.
I'll touch on a point before I forget. You just mentioned one other thing, and it's all companies, is these in some contact centers I've been into. We straight away we said, what's the reason you're not doing this? Because I don't see why you wouldn't do it. Fear of change. There's just death by paralysis of making a mistake in a contact center and making an effect worse. As managers and leaders, whoever's on this call, one thing that you have to do, and we all have to do, is create that culture that testing, trialing, measure result. You have to measure the results. You can always revert it back. Is acceptable. If you don't do that, then change doesn't happen. That's something else that drives on the people side. You touched it there. We've seen some contact centers we go into that we're using our products, and we put recommendations forward that we know will add value, and they've not done.
Yeah.
There's no cost. So yeah, we need to. I think we all need to look at that as well, why that happens. But yeah, there's a question there. Someone asked, how do you do demand reduction? I'll answer that. There's different ways how they deflect into digital. The most common one we've seen voice to digital is in an IVR. If the queue time's high on the voice call, say 20 minutes, and you check your queue time on email or web chat queues and it's low, they tell the person queuing, we'll save your position in the queue, we'll call you back, or would you like to go to web chat that has 2-minute queue time? If you do, press one, send them an SMS, click on the link, they're in the web chat. There's things like that. So again, looking at the data, where appropriate, it improves customer experience. If you try and do it on every call just to get away from voice, decreases customer experience. So that's why there's no 1 and 0 answer. It's always specific to the use case. And there is others. And if you want more, we will answer more all the Q&As, and we'll do more thorough answers. Again, mindful of time, I'll be getting shouted at soon. But I could talk about this topic for 2 hours. And what we see, what works as well across industries, and why it works, and more importantly, why things fail, because that's another common one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can probably squeeze in one relatively quick question before we need to close off. So we're going to run maybe a couple of minutes over. How do you get the entire team bought into cost saving? Was one that we had before the webinar.
Okay, well, I've said it before on this call. First thing, you're not cost saving. You're growing the company sustainably, and if language is a big part of that, and it's because then it becomes part of the problem solving. You're not cutting costs. We're becoming more efficient, and that's again, to be brutal. I like doing the unpopular opinions. Any leader, manager, that's the job. It'd be great if we could all just keep spending money, but we're not living in that world anymore. The job is now we need to grow sustainably. So we set out those challenges. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. We have to create that environment as leaders. Let them experiment, as long as it's done in a safe working environment where results are measured, and if it's not going well, it can be reverted back fast, because you will find some won't work, some will make permanent improvements. If there's a fear around spending money, well, there is that a lot at the moment. All products and services should add value, and although there's a salespeople try and sell you anything, that shouldn't be the case anymore. You only sell to people where you know you can add value. And quite often now there's vendor challenges where they have to prove their value before you sign into contracts. That's common now. And there is definitely, I would say, in some contact centers, in order to improve that efficiency, we're seeing it even in our business, technology is the answer. Yes, staff are a big part of that, but so is technology. And it doesn't always decrease costs, but it does improve efficiencies and experience for a smaller cost increase than what it would to get the same uplift with increasing pure staff costs. And it's putting that argument through and can make it compelling. And like I said, how do you get everyone bought in? It's a challenge we all have to face. So let's solve that challenge together and make it a challenge that we're going to do as a team. Also, don't just throw the problem at them and say they've got to solve it. We're all in this together. And I think a lot of it is around the framing. But yeah, definitely it's the number one is take away the negative condemnation towards it, because you recreate that.
Yeah, again, coming back to what I was saying before around that culture of empowerment, I think is the critical thing. Here is a challenge we face as a business. I encourage everybody to be empowered to consider this and come forward with ideas. The asterisk to that is that if you are saying that to your staff, you kind of have to live and breathe that. If you invite in ideas and at least, if they're not engaged with, or if they're not responded to, then that can be a negative. So if you're inviting that, if you're opening that door, be ready for what comes through that door, and at least tackle it positive, whether that's a yes or a no, acknowledge, tackle, and handle that.
Yeah. Internally, for example, we have a crazy ideas board. You put anything on there. Everyone knows what our priorities are. Put your crazy ideas on the crazy idea board. Just things like that. But again, you have to deal with it. We've already had someone chasing saying, where's the feedback on the crazy ideas board? And we haven't got to it. But there's some good ideas there. There really is.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to get that climbing wall in the office, Ben.
Yeah, that's that.
So unfortunately, we have run a little bit over. Apologies for that. I'm going to draw us to a close there. Thank you, everybody who's submitted questions. We will reach out to you separately afterwards with responses to those particular points that we haven't got to. We did tackle a couple of the Q&A questions that came in through the course of the conversation, but we didn't get to all of them, so my apologies. Again, reminder that we will be sending a follow-up email with that recording so you can review what we've said. And if you have any other additional questions that come off the back of this that you think of after the fact, Ben won't thank me for this, but I'm going to say, reach out to us on LinkedIn, whether that's Max Contact directly, or you can go to our website, maxcontact.com, reach out to us. We love having these conversations. As you can tell, Ben and I are both pretty passionate about this stuff. So yeah. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much to yourself, Ben, and to everyone who joined us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.